She expected you to come back, but you walked away in silenced stoicism. She expected the door to open again. She expected a message at midnight, a call at the worst possible moment, a version of you returning exactly when it was convenient for her, exactly on the terms she had grown used to setting. That is how it had always gone before. You would leave, and eventually you would come back, because coming back was easier than sitting with the discomfort of staying gone. But this time was different. This time you walked away and the door simply stayed closed. No message, no call, no performance of anger meant to invite a response. Just silence, stretching further than she ever expected it to stretch. The ancient Stoics understood something about this kind of silence that modern heartbreak culture rarely teaches. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the true measure of a man was not how loudly he protested his pain, but how quietly he carried it while still moving forward with his life. Seneca warned that chasing anyone who does not choose to stay is a betrayal of your own dignity, a slow erosion of self-respect disguised as devotion. Epictetus taught that peace begins the moment you stop trying to control what was never yours to control in the first place, including another person's choices, another person's timing, another person's return. Tonight we are going to explore what actually happens when you finally walk away and mean it, not the dramatic exit followed by a quiet return 3 weeks later. Not the silence used as a manipulation tactic to provoke a reaction, but the real, settled, permanent kind of walking away that the Stoics practiced as a form of self-respect. Because there is a particular kind of power in becoming a closed door, and very few people ever learn to hold themselves that way. This lesson is not about her at all, not really. It never was. It is about what happens inside you when you finally stop waiting for a door you closed yourself to somehow reopen from the other side. It is about the strange, unfamiliar peace that arrives once you stop measuring your days by whether she has reached out. Before we continue, if this kind of wisdom speaks to you, subscribe to Quotes Library right now. This channel exists to help you build the calm, composed strength the Stoics wrote about centuries ago. Subscribe, and let's begin. Principle 1. Walking away is not the same as punishing her. There is an important distinction to make at the very start of this lesson. Walking away in silence, done correctly, is never about revenge. It is not a strategy designed to make her suffer, to teach her a lesson, or to force regret out of someone who did not value what she had. The moment silence becomes a weapon aimed at causing pain, it stops being Stoic discipline and becomes something far pettier, a performance of indifference still secretly hoping for a reaction. Epictetus taught that a wise man concerns himself only with what lies within his control, his own actions, his own judgments, his own character. Whether she feels regret, whether she reaches out one day, whether time eventually teaches her something about what she lost, none of that belongs to you. Chasing that outcome, even through the passive strategy of silence, still keeps your peace tethered to her reaction. True walking away releases that tether entirely. You are not leaving to make her feel something. You are leaving because staying no longer served the person you were becoming. This distinction changes everything about how the silence feels from the inside. A silence built to punish carries tension, a coiled expectation waiting for the door to reopen so the performance can pay off. A silence built on genuine release carries none of that tension. It simply exists, calm and complete, because it was never conditional on her response in the first place. Learning to walk away this second way, without needing her to notice, without needing her to hurt, is the entire foundation of everything else we will cover tonight. Consider the difference in how each version ages over the following months. A silence built for punishment requires constant maintenance, a private tally of whether it is working, whether she has noticed, whether the intended sting has landed yet. It keeps you tethered to her emotional state as surely as any phone call would, simply through a different mechanism. A silence built on genuine release requires no maintenance at all. It simply continues, indifferent to whether she has noticed anything, because its entire purpose was never located in her reaction to begin with. One version exhausts you slowly over time. The other version, once established, actually restores the energy the relationship's ending had drained. Principle 2. Silence removes the power she once held. For as long as a relationship, or the memory of one, still holds emotional weight, the person on the other side retains a kind of quiet power over you. A message from them can rearrange your entire mood. Their silence can gnaw at you for days. Their return, even briefly, can pull you back into old patterns you swore you had outgrown. This power is rarely intentional. It is simply what happens when two people build history together, and history does not dissolve the moment a relationship ends. Walking away in true silence is the surest method the Stoics identified for dismantling that power piece by piece. Seneca described emotional attachment to another person's opinion of you as one of the heaviest chains a person could carry, heavier than any physical burden, because it is invisible and therefore easy to underestimate. Every time you resist the urge to reach out, to check on her, to see whether she has moved on or stayed stuck, you loosen that chain a little further. The urge does not vanish overnight, but each time it goes unanswered, its grip weakens. Eventually, a strange and quiet freedom sets in. Her name no longer carries the same charge. A memory surfaces and passes without disturbing your whole day. This is not coldness. It is the natural result of consistently declining to feed a connection that no longer belongs in your present life. The power she once held was never permanent. It was sustained by your continued reactions to it, and silence, held long enough, simply starves that power until it can no longer move you. There is a useful way to track this progress honestly, without deceiving yourself about how far along you actually are. Notice the next time her name comes up in conversation, unexpectedly, through a mutual friend or an old photograph resurfacing on a device. Pay attention to the immediate physical response, the tightening in your chest, the sudden shift in your mood, or the absence of either. Early in the process, that response is often sharp and immediate. Months later, if the silence has been genuine rather than performed, the same trigger tends to produce something far quieter, closer to observation than disruption. This shift is not something you can force on a schedule, but tracking it honestly gives you a clearer sense of your own progress than any amount of guessing ever could. If this is resonating with you, take a moment to subscribe to Quotes Library. We bring you Stoic wisdom built to help you reclaim your peace after loss, betrayal, or any ending that once felt impossible to walk through. Hit that subscribe button and let's keep going. Principle 3. The story of Servius and the letters he never sent. Let me tell you a short story that illustrates this lesson. In a coastal town within the Roman provinces, there lived a merchant named Servius, a composed and steady man known throughout the port for his fair dealings. Servius had once been engaged to a woman named Livia, a match arranged through their families that had, against expectation, grown into genuine affection over their years of courtship. When Livia's family fortune collapsed suddenly through a failed shipping venture, she broke the engagement without warning, choosing instead to marry a wealthier suitor who could restore her family's standing. Servius was devastated, but he was also a student of philosophy, having studied under a traveling Stoic teacher in his youth. In the weeks after the engagement ended, he wrote letter after letter to Livia, pouring out his confusion, his grief, his lingering hope that she might reconsider once her family's circumstances improved. But Servius never sent a single one of those letters. Instead, he kept them locked in a small chest, using the act of writing to process his pain privately rather than to influence her decision. He understood, even in his grief, that sending them would only be an attempt to control an outcome that was no longer his to control. Months passed, and Servius rebuilt his trade routes, expanded his business, and slowly returned to the steady, composed man his community had always known him to be. Livia, meanwhile, heard through mutual acquaintances that Servius had said nothing, reached out to no one, and carried himself with the same quiet dignity he always had, even after her sudden departure. This surprised her more than any letter could have. She had expected pleading, or at minimum some visible sign of the wound she had caused. Instead she found silence, steady and complete, and it unsettled her far more than anger ever would have. Servius, throughout those months, was not entirely untouched. He confided to his old philosophy teacher, in one of the rare letters he did actually send, that the discipline of silence had been the hardest practice he had ever undertaken, harder than any negotiation or hardship his trade had ever demanded of him. His teacher wrote back a short reply, reminding him that anything worth building rarely feels easy in its early stages, and that the ache he described was simply proof the practice was working exactly as intended rather than evidence that something had gone wrong. Years later, when Livia's second marriage collapsed under its own difficulties, she found herself thinking of Servius often, wondering about the letters he might have written, unaware they had existed all along, locked away and never delivered. Servius, by then, had built a life entirely independent of her presence in it. He did not walk away to make her wonder. He walked away because his peace demanded it, and the wondering that followed was simply what quiet dignity leaves behind on its own, without ever being aimed at anyone. Principle 4. Time reveals what silence never needs to explain. One of the hardest parts of walking away is resisting the urge to explain yourself fully, to make sure she understands exactly why you left, exactly what she did, exactly how much it cost you to finally close the door. The Stoics taught that this urge, however natural, often works against the very peace you are trying to build. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a man secure in his own judgment does not need to convince others of its correctness. The action itself carries the explanation, whether or not anyone chooses to understand it in the moment. Time operates far more effectively than any explanation you could offer. A person who truly valued you tends to understand, given enough distance, exactly what they lost and exactly why the silence arrived when it did. A person who did not value you will likely never understand, no matter how thoroughly you explain yourself, because understanding was never the actual issue standing between you. In either case, your explanation changes nothing about the eventual outcome. It only delays your own healing while you wait for a comprehension that may never come. This does not mean closure is worthless or that conversations about an ending are always unnecessary. Sometimes clarity genuinely serves both people, and Stoic wisdom does not demand silence in every circumstance. But when the urge to explain is really just the urge to be understood, to be missed, to be proven right, that urge deserves a closer look before you act on it. Often the kindest and strongest thing you can offer yourself is trusting time to reveal what your words never fully could. There is also a quieter reason explanations rarely accomplish what we hope they will. Most explanations offered after an ending are not actually addressed to the other person at all. However much they appear to be, they are addressed to your own need for the story to make sense, for the ending to feel justified, for your own actions to be recorded somewhere as reasonable and understandable. This need is real and worth honoring, but it does not require her presence to be satisfied. A journal entry, a conversation with a trusted friend, or simply time spent thinking clearly can meet this need just as fully as a conversation with her ever could, without the added risk of reopening a door that silence was working to close. Principle 5. Her reaction is not a measure of your worth. When you walk away and she does not immediately react the way you hoped, whether through regret, apology, or a desperate attempt to win you back, it is easy to interpret that absence as proof that you never mattered to her at all. This interpretation is one of the most common traps people fall into after an ending, and the Stoics offer a sharper way of understanding it. Epictetus taught that other people's reactions are shaped by their own circumstances, their own capacity, and their own unresolved patterns, far more than they are shaped by your actual worth. Someone can genuinely value you and still fail to show it through the response you were hoping for. Fear, pride, timing, or simple emotional limitation can prevent a person from reacting the way their internal feelings might otherwise suggest. This does not excuse poor treatment, but it does mean her silence, or her apparent indifference, is not a reliable measurement of how much you meant to her. Measuring your worth through someone else's reaction hands away a judgment that only you are equipped to make honestly. The Stoics would tell you to look instead at your own conduct throughout the relationship and its ending. Did you act with honesty? Did you act with integrity? Did you give what you were capable of giving at the time? If the answer is yes, her reaction, or lack of one, changes nothing about the value of what you offered. Worth built on internal judgment cannot be shaken by someone else's silence, confusion, or delayed understanding, however long that delay might stretch. It helps to build a simple, honest habit here, a private accounting of your own conduct rather than a running tally of hers. At the end of each difficult day, ask yourself plainly whether you acted with the integrity you actually hold yourself to, regardless of how she behaved or failed to behave. This habit slowly shifts the entire orientation of your healing, moving the center of judgment from her reaction back to your own conduct, which was always the only measure genuinely within your control from the very beginning. Take a moment right now and subscribe to Quotes Library if you have not already. This channel is built for people who are done measuring their worth through someone else's reactions and want to build a peace that holds regardless of outcome. Subscribe, and let's continue. Principle 6. The discomfort of silence is temporary, the freedom is not. The early days of true silence are often the hardest. The urge to check on her, to see if she has reached out, to imagine what she might be thinking, can feel almost unbearable at first. This discomfort is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is simply the natural friction of breaking a pattern your mind had grown accustomed to relying on for comfort, closure, or connection. Seneca compared difficult transitions to the discomfort a sailor feels when first learning to trust open water without the shoreline in view. The unfamiliarity feels dangerous even when it is not given enough time. The sailor learns that the open water was never the threat it initially seemed to be. The same principle applies here. The early ache of silence feels overwhelming precisely because it is unfamiliar. not because it is genuinely unbearable or unsustainable in the long run. What waits on the other side of that initial discomfort is a freedom rarely discussed openly, the freedom of no longer organizing your emotional state around someone else's choices. No longer refreshing a phone. No longer replaying old conversations searching for signs you missed. No longer wondering whether today is the day she reaches out. This freedom does not arrive instantly, and it is not linear. There will be harder days mixed among easier ones. But the discomfort of true silence is temporary by nature, while the freedom it eventually produces tends to remain long after the ache has faded into memory. There is a practical way to move through this early discomfort without pretending it does not exist. Give yourself permission to feel the ache fully in private, through movement, through writing, through honest conversation with someone who will not report back to her or judge you for struggle. What matters is that the ache moves through you rather than getting trapped behind a performance of unaffected calm you have not actually reached yet. Genuine composure is built by processing difficulty honestly, not by skipping past it and hoping no one notices the gap between how you appear and how you actually feel. Principle 7. Walking away rebuilds the self that was lost. Every relationship asks something of you, and not all of those requests are healthy ones. Some relationships slowly reshape you into someone smaller than you were before, quieter, more accommodating, more willing to shrink your own needs to preserve the connection. Walking away, difficult as it is, often becomes the first real opportunity to notice how much of yourself had been set aside in the process, and to begin the slow work of retrieving it. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about returning to one's true nature after periods of distraction or compromise, treating this return not as regression but as restoration. The version of you that existed before certain relationships shaped your habits, your confidence, your sense of what you deserved, has not disappeared. It has simply been buried beneath accumulated compromise, waiting for the space and silence necessary to resurface. Walking away creates exactly that space. This is often why people describe unexpected clarity, renewed ambition, or rediscovered hobbies and friendships in the months following a difficult ending. It is not simply the passage of time healing a wound. It is the deliberate reclaiming of a self that had been quietly diminished, piece by piece, without you fully noticing until the silence gave you room to see it clearly. Walking away, in this sense, is never really about her at all. It is about returning to the version of yourself that deserves far more than what shrinking for someone else's comfort ever allowed. This restoration rarely happens all at once. It tends to arrive in small, almost unremarkable moments, deciding to take a class you had always postponed, reconnecting with a friend you had drifted from during the relationship, waking up one morning and realizing you had made a decision entirely on your own terms without first calculating how she might react to it. None of these moments feel dramatic in isolation. Stacked together over months, they form the outline of a person who has genuinely returned to themselves, built not through a single act of willpower but through the steady accumulation of ordinary choices made in the space that silence created. Principle 8. The story continued, what Livia never knew. Let us return to Servius, our merchant from earlier, a few years further into his story. His trade had grown considerably, extending along new coastal routes he had built entirely on his own initiative during the quiet years following Livia's departure. He had remarried, to a woman named Cassia who valued the same steady composure that had once unsettled Livia so deeply. Servius rarely spoke of his earlier engagement, not out of bitterness, but simply because it no longer occupied meaningful space in his present life. One afternoon, a mutual acquaintance mentioned that Livia had inquired about him, curious whether he had ever remarried, whether his trade had recovered from the difficult years following their broken engagement. Servius listened politely, offered a brief and genuinely warm response wishing her well, and returned to his work without any lingering disturbance in his mood. He felt no need to send word back through the acquaintance, no need to let her know how well he had built his life without her. This calm indifference was not built overnight. It was the accumulated result of years spent refusing to chase, refusing to explain, refusing to measure his worth through her eventual curiosity about his fate. The letters he had once written and never sent remained locked away, a private record of grief long since processed and released. Livia never learned they existed. She never needed to. Servius had not walked away to be understood by her. He had walked away to become fully understood by himself, and in the years that followed, that understanding proved far more valuable than anything her eventual curiosity could have offered him. His teacher, visiting the coastal town some years later, asked Servius plainly whether he had any lingering regret about the silence he had maintained for so long. Servius considered the question honestly before answering. He admitted there had been nights early on when he questioned whether the discipline was worth the loneliness it demanded. But looking at the life he had built since, the trade routes established through his own steady judgment, the marriage built on mutual respect rather than desperate need, he told his teacher that the silence had asked far less of him than staying silently unhappy inside a version of himself he no longer recognized ever had. Principle 9. Silence does not mean you stop living. It is important to clarify what true Stoic silence actually looks like in daily practice, because it is often misunderstood as withdrawal from life itself. Walking away from her does not mean withdrawing from friends, from ambition, from joy, from the ordinary business of building a meaningful life. In fact, the Stoics would argue that continuing to live fully, to work, to laugh, to pursue your goals, is one of the clearest expressions of genuine release available to you. A person still secretly hoping for her return often puts their life on quiet pause, waiting rather than building, watching the door rather than walking further into their own future. A person who has truly walked away does the opposite. They continue moving forward with full attention, not as a performance meant to prove something to her, but because life genuinely continues regardless of how any single relationship ended. Marcus Aurelius wrote that time given to dwelling on what has passed is time stolen from the life still available to be lived. If you notice yourself pausing your own growth while waiting for an outcome involving her, whether her regret, her return, or simply her awareness of how well you are doing, that pause is worth examining honestly. True silence does not require an audience to remain complete. It continues whether she notices or not, because the life being built during that silence was never meant to be a message sent in her direction in the first place. If you are finding value in this lesson, this is a good moment to subscribe to Quotes Library. We release videos exactly like this one, built to help you walk through endings with dignity rather than desperation. Subscribe now so you do not miss what comes next. Principle 10. What waits on the other side of the silence? Eventually, for most people who practice this discipline honestly, something shifts. The silence stops feeling like restraint and starts feeling like simple peace. Her name no longer arrives with a jolt. The old questions about what might have been quiet down into something closer to acceptance. This shift does not happen on a fixed schedule, and it does not happen at all for those who use silence as a disguised waiting room rather than a genuine release. What waits on the other side is rarely dramatic. It is not usually a triumphant return where she finally realizes what she lost while you stand transformed and untouchable. Sometimes that happens. More often, what waits is simply an ordinary, steady life, rebuilt quietly during the months you spent choosing not to chase, not to explain, not to measure your worth through her eventual reaction. This ordinary steadiness, understated as it sounds, is precisely what the Stoics considered the highest achievable outcome, a settled mind unshaken by circumstances outside its control. If you are early in this process, still feeling the ache of a silence that has not yet turned into peace, trust that the discomfort is doing exactly what it is meant to do. It is clearing space for the version of you that does not need her return to feel complete. That version is already within reach. It simply requires the same disciplined Servius practiced, letters written and never sent, grief processed rather than performed, and a door that, once closed, stays closed regardless of who eventually wonders what waits behind it. Principle 11. You do not need her permission to move on. There is a quiet assumption many people carry without realizing it, the belief that moving on somehow requires closure, agreement, or acknowledgement from the other person before it can genuinely begin. The Stoics rejected this assumption entirely. Epictetus taught that permission for your own peace was never something another person could grant or withhold in the first place, regardless of how significant their role in your life once was. Waiting for her blessing, her understanding, or even her awareness of how far you have come is simply another way of keeping her in control of a process that was always yours alone to complete. This does not mean her role in your story is erased or diminished. It simply means her participation is no longer required for the next chapter to begin. You can move forward fully, build a new life, love again if that is what you choose, all without a single word passing between you ever again. The relationship existed, it mattered, it ended. None of these facts require her sign-off to be true, and none of them require her sign-off for you to continue living fully in whatever comes next. Recognizing this often produces a surprising sense of relief, because so much unnecessary waiting quietly falls away the moment you stop requiring her involvement in your own healing. The silence you have built no longer needs an audience, an explanation, or an eventual resolution delivered from her side. It simply stands complete on its own, exactly as the Stoics understood true peace always had to be. Conclusion. Let the silence be complete. She expected you to come back, because that is what had always happened before. This time, you did not, and in that difference lies the entire lesson the Stoics have been trying to teach for centuries. Walking away with dignity is not about punishing anyone. It is not a performance designed to provoke regret. It is simply the quiet, deliberate act of choosing your own peace over the familiar comfort of old patterns that no longer serve who you are becoming. Think of Servius, who never sent a single letter, who rebuilt his life not to prove anything to Livia, but because his own peace demanded forward motion. Think of Marcus Aurelius, reminding himself that time spent dwelling on what has passed is time stolen from the life still available to be lived. Think of Epictetus, teaching that another person's reaction was never yours to control in the first place, and that true freedom begins the moment you release your grip on outcomes that were never within your reach. If you are standing at your own closed door right now, resisting the urge to reopen it, trust that the discomfort you feel is temporary, and the peace waiting on the other side is not. Let the silence be complete. Let time do what explanations never could, and build the life that was always waiting for you, whether she ever notices or not. Somewhere down the road, whether she reaches out or never does, whether time teaches her what she lost or she simply moves through life without ever fully understanding it, none of that will matter as much as the life you build in the meantime. That life, built quietly during a silence you chose and honored, will be the real answer to everything she once expected from you. Not an answer delivered in words, but one lived out fully, day after day, in a version of you she never got the chance to see. Subscribe to Quotes Library before you go, so you never miss a lesson like this one. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment about a silence that changed your own life, and let's keep building this community of people choosing peace over chasing. Keep becoming.